Hi, I'm the Apostle Virgil, the ever doubtful and... Ooh, wait. I can get rid of these black bars here. There we go. Widescreen. And this is the Book of Mormon, the poorly animated edition. And this is the Sum Up, Rehash, Retread, Reflection, Bottle Show, the Clip Show, the best of. The Sum It All Up For Me there, Virgil episode. I mean, maybe you don't have time to watch the first 20. Or maybe you just aren't sure if you want to. Well, hopefully this will give you a quick view into the Book of Mormon. And maybe it'll get you to go back and watch them. Or maybe you're here because you love them so much. You just want to have a little bit of flashback and remember the good times. So the obvious question is, well, who the heck is Nephi? And the answer is, he's the son of Lehi and Sariah and the narrator of this book. Lehi is a prophet. Sariah is his wife, and she's notable for two reasons. One, she's the only female in this book with a name. And second, she's the only female in this book who says anything. Lehi and Sariah have 3 other boys. The next oldest from Nephi is Sam, who I dressed up like he was in The Lord of the Rings because his name is Sam. But it turned out to be pretty accurate, because he pretty much turns invisible for most of the book. And Nephi's oldest brothers are Laman and Lemuel, who by the 3rd or 4th chapter I had turned into a single 2-headed monster, because Laman and Lemuel's only job in this book is to be an obstacle. Every chapter they have some reason to get in the way, and every chapter there is something that turns them around. It's either a long speech or a direct act of God or some other amazingness that convinces them that they should get right with the program and move forward. But by the next chapter they've forgotten all of that and are just in the way again. They're not really people. They're not really useful. They don't say very much. Their job is to be in the way, and so I've turned them into a 2-headed monster because it made it easier to keep track of. Last thing I should note is that if you go back and watch the original series, for the first couple chapters, everyone is dark-skinned because this all takes place in 600 BC Jerusalem. So you would think that being Middle Eastern Jews, they would have tan skin. But the book is very explicit that they are white, Caucasian. It calls it fair and delightsome, and later on it will even curse their enemies, the children of Laman and Lemuel, with dark skin. The racism is clear and obvious, and it cannot be overemphasized. But I changed them white because one of the few character traits I get from this book, one of the few descriptions I get from this book, one of the few things it actually tells me about these people is that they are white. I can't ignore it and can't draw them accurately genetically, so I have to draw them accurately as characters. So they are white and will be white for the rest of the series, I'm sure, and for this summation, because those are the characters. Nephi also grows a beard halfway, because he has a bunch of kids. 8 years go by and he has a bunch of kids. I don't know how many. I don't know what their names are. That's the problem. The book doesn't tell you. So those are the major characters. At the beginning of the book, a couple more people are introduced, and I'll describe them as we go. But that's the main cast you need to know. The book itself is divided into 2 categories of story. The first is plot, people doing things. It introduces characters. Those characters have sort of adventures. They move around. They run into problems, and they tend to overcome them. The book starts with the plot, and then, I don't know, chapter 8 or so, it suddenly shifts over to the other type of thing, and that is descriptions of visions or prophecies. These are endless and overwrought and actually rather boring. They're repeated over and over again, too, and that is the absolute worst thing. For example, there's a vision about a tree that represents heaven and goodness that Lehi has. But of course, Nephi is narrating the story, so we hear about it from Nephi. But later on, Nephi has a vision himself in which he asks the angel who's giving him the vision to show him the vision of the tree. The angel does, and then Nephi tells us about it again, and he interprets it. And it's really not that difficult of an interpretation anyway. So that's the second section, which is all the visions and prophecies. And while the book has the prophecies and the stories in the middle of the plot, it really doesn't work well. So I'm going to give you the plot of the story first and then come back and give you the visions and prophecies as a second section. So with that said, let's move on to the actual plot of the story of 1st Nephi. Lehi lives in Jerusalem in 600 BCE, and he has a vision about the destruction of Jerusalem, which is going to happen. The Babylonians invade and they destroy it. And this is all pointed out also by the prophet Jeremiah. I don't know what happens to him. He doesn't appear in this book. And he also has a vision of the Messiah and explicitly describes Jesus. And Lehi attempts to warn his countrymen. That does not go well, and he has to flee the city. He goes out into the wilderness, and in the scope of this book, everywhere that is not Jerusalem is essentially the wilderness. He takes his family south from Jerusalem to the Red Sea, and he does this very quickly, and I mean impossibly quickly, and I'm not going to go over it again, but he camps in a valley by a river that doesn't exist, and he names the valley and river after his sons, but they never go back once they leave, so it doesn't really matter what they call it. While they're camped there, it begins a back and forth between the wilderness and the city of Jerusalem. Lehi receives a vision from God that says that there are these brass plates back in Jerusalem that are being held by this guy named Laban. And the brass plates represent the Old Testament. They are the Old Testament. Now, why the Old Testament is on brass plates and not, as you would normally find it, on a bunch of scrolls is beyond the scope of this story. So he sends his sons, Nephi, Sam, Laman, and Lemuel, back to the city. They attempt to beg the plates from Laban. They attempt to bribe Laban with all the stuff they were going to leave behind anyway, neither of which works, and Laban sends his guards and chases them out of the city into the wilderness, some other part of the wilderness. There's a rock. While they're at this rock, Laman and Lemuel attempt to beat Nephi to death with a rod, and they are stopped by an angel. An actual angel appears, tells them to cut that out, that they can do this, that it's the will of God that they get these things. So Nephi gets them turned around, and they head back to Jerusalem. Once in Jerusalem, Nephi sneaks into the city, and an angel leads him to Laban, who is lying drunk and unconscious in the street. Nephi then kills Laban under the direction of the angel. He takes his steel sword, and I won't comment on the anachronism of a steel sword in Jerusalem in 500 BC, and he kills him. He cuts his head off. He decapitates him. And the angel, again, has ordered him to do this. Nephi then puts on Laban's robes, his now blood-covered robes, and takes his sword and tracks down, thanks to the help of the angel again, the vault or the safe or whatever it is, where the brass plates are kept. And there's a guard there, and the guard's name is Zoram. And Zoram is convinced that Nephi is actually Laban, because it's a kid wearing the clothing of his boss. So I guess he's either never met his boss or there's magic. It doesn't make any difference. Zoram is convinced to bring the plates and follow Nephi. Nephi goes out to the outside of the city where he's left his brothers. They convince Zoram to come with them, or he's a hostage. I mean, I think it works better as if he's a hostage, but they then go back out to the wilderness where Lehi is still camped, so they have achieved brass plates. Lehi then has another vision that there are too many dudes out here in the wilderness. It is way too many dudes and not enough ladies. And since God wants them to start an entirely new civilization somewhere, they should probably go find some ladies. And this is important outside the Book of Mormon, because if you ever hear a Mormon say that Native Americans are not descended directly from the Nephites or exclusively from the Nephites, then why did they have to go back and get some ladies? So Nephi, Sam, and Laman and Lemuel go back to Jerusalem, all the way back to Jerusalem, and they find this guy Ishmael. They're led to this guy Ishmael, and God softens Ishmael's heart. And Ishmael's important because he has 5 daughters, and there are 5, with the inclusion of Zoram, there are 5 eligible bachelors out in the wilderness right now. And so Ishmael, his 5 daughters, and his 2 sons and their families, who are never named or counted, follow Nephi back out to Lehi in the wilderness. It is at this point that Ishmael's 2 unnamed sons become part of the Laman and Lemuel obstacle course. So they will occasionally take the place of Laman and Lemuel, getting in the way of Lehi or Nephi's plans. So once back to camp, they have a bunch of visions and go through a bunch of reporting on what plates they have and what those plates means, and none of it's particularly important, and I will come back to the visions. But they marry all the women. All 5 of the men marry all 5 of the available women, and I guess that all works out. I don't know how much time has passed, but it happens. And then Lehi gets a vision that he needs to move this train along. They need to continue on their way. I guess they've got all the stuff they needed from Jerusalem, no more trips back. And in the morning, he wakes up, and there is a brass ball sitting outside his tent, which turns out is a compass, an actual compass. In 600 BCE, Jerusalem, he finds a compass. It's magical, it's brass. It receives text messages from God, by the way. And just add that in as an aside. And if you're interested in how anachronistic a compass is, it's a miracle. It's fine. So they all leave, and they head out along the east coast of the Red Sea. The compass is described as leading them to the more fertile parts of the wilderness, which is in fact a giant desert, if you're not aware of the Arabian desert. Also of interest is that God is provisioning them. They're receiving food from God, and the meat does not have to be cooked. Neither of these miracles is explained in any way, and it's a little confusing because Nephi has to go hunting, and when he has a bad time hunting, it affects them. So I guess God is only giving them some provisions. Nephi breaks a bow, a steel bow. I don't know if you know how a bow works, but a steel bow would be A, anachronistic, and B, difficult to use. So that leads to more trouble. They work it out. He makes another bow. And so having all those problems worked out, they arrive at a place called Nahom, where Ishmael, unfortunately, passes away. We know very little about Nahom. It's apparently on the east coast of the Red Sea if you want to go look for it. The Mormons certainly are. From Nahom, they turn east, and they travel across the desert following the compass until they arrive at a place called Bountiful. And where Bountiful is a mystery, but they're here because this is where they're going to launch their ship for the New World, the ship that Nephi is going to build them. It is casually thrown in at this point that it has been 8 years since they left Jerusalem. We have no information on when and where and why that happened. Also, Nephi now has 2 younger brothers, and their names are given, but I'm not going to look them up because they don't have any part to play in this. And Nephi, under the direct instruction of God, and I mean direct instruction, starts cobbling this ship together and completes it in about 2 sentences, and they launch from wherever we are, Oman, Yemen, somewhere, and they travel to America. The Book of Mormon, by the way, is very, very clear about where they're going. It's America. The prophecies say it's basically America. There's no debating this point. While they're on the seas, there is an interesting little story about the daughters of Ishmael dancing and being rude, and that's really all we know. Nephi's brothers get tired of his complaining about this, so they tie him to the mast. There was a big storm. They untie him. The compass stops working and starts working again, and they continue on their way and get to America with no further problems. Where, in America, they plant all their seeds and find animals that shouldn't exist and find lots of things to keep them alive, and they start building their new civilization. Details may be to follow. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. So that's the plot of First Nephi. That's the story that's going on in the text with the characters. Now, sadly, we must talk about the visions of Lehi and Nephi. The first big vision is Lehi, who imagines a dark place, and he's walking with a man in white who takes him to a tree. And upon the tree there are white fruit, brilliant white fruit, and those white fruit represent the rewards of heaven. So that if you do the right things and follow the commandments and so on and so forth, you will get to taste the white fruit. So pretty straightforward. There is a path to the tree, which is straight and narrow, and is clearly the things you have to do to get there, the path to the rewards of heaven. And it's covered in darkness, and there is an iron rod that
represents, I assume, the Bible or the Book of Mormon or whatever it is. So you have to follow the rules. This helps you get along the path and out of the darkness. Along the side of it, there is a river that represents sort of hell. It is a river of filth, and you fall into it and you're swept away. There's also a house, a building on a cloud that represents sort of the rewards of this earth. So that you build up these big houses and these rewards of riches, and it gains you nothing, and you mock the people who are looking for the tree. So that vision is really not that hard to follow, but it is repeated several times. The second vision is of Nephi, and Nephi has a vision of an olive tree, which represents Israel. It's clearly described as representing Israel, and there's a branch of the tree that's cut off and then grafted back on later, and that represents Mormons. They're a branch of the true following of Israel, the true following of God, and along that path you get Jesus. The third vision is Nephi's. Nephi has a vision in which he sees his father's vision, but he also sees a lot of things other than that, including the birth of the Messiah. Mary is described as being white, by the way, and he sees the birth and death of Jesus, his baptism, and so forth. He then gets some visions of the future. His own ancestors will battle with the ancestors of his brothers, which leads me to my ever-present question of why don't you just leave your brothers behind? And then there is a vision of the two churches, the church of the good church, the church of probably the Mormon church, the Latter-day Saint church, which is the right and true church, which follows the God and the commandments. And then there's the evil church, which is clearly the Catholic Church, which is built up by the devil, and the devil has damaged or destroyed the books of the Bible. And that moves forward to the very explicit descriptions of Joseph Smith and Jesus being part of this church. So those are the visions in brief of the Book of Mormon, 1 Nephi. They're not terrible to get through, but they're repeated constantly and overanalyzed. So I just wanted to do a brief plow through to get to the end of this chapter. So that is 1 Nephi. I hope you enjoyed my summation of it. I hope you got something out of it. And I will be starting soon on 2 Nephi, which will be exciting because I've got a lot of experience now in making these. So this was, I think, my 21st video. So come back soon, like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon with the second book of Nephi.